Hey, what's going on, everybody? Good morning. It's been a little while since I've done a video. The NBA playoffs have been exciting and fun. I enjoyed watching the games, a few bets here and there, but yeah, the bets were tough. So I've talked to some other cappers, and in multiple sports, it seems like for many people, the playoffs are just a different animal. And this being my first full season, I definitely have struggled with the playoffs. So all that to say, I've just backed off a little bit. I'm paying attention still and kind of keeping track of how I would play the games, but I've definitely backed off of taking picks, and we'll enjoy the playoffs and then regroup and come back at it next year. So got a big UFC pay-per-view coming up this weekend, and I've wanted to jump back in with some UFC content over the past few weeks, really hoping to do this with some other people in coming weeks, and I probably won't have it every week. But before I jump into talking some about this week's UFC card, I do just want to tell you the angle that I'm bringing to this, because there is a ton of good content out there at this point. I listen to a lot of the content. I have a lot of respect for a ton of the cappers out there. There's a lot of people putting in the kind of work that hopefully I'm putting in on NBA or MLB now, people putting in that level of work on UFC, and I will tag some of them. Ton of respect for them. But what I wanted to bring to the table is, I know for some people listening to like 20 hours of UFC commentary or podcasts every week is not totally doable. And so what I want to do is kind of like, I've done some business consulting work in my life, believe that or not. I don't wear this fucking hat when I do that, but with business consulting, you go into a business and you don't know as much about their business as they do. They're there every day. They know the ins and outs. They know every little thing that's going on. But what happens over time is they get so deep in the weeds that that they don't see things that maybe should be obvious, or maybe they're not even obvious, but they just have a harder time uncovering things. I mean, the same could be true like the way that your family works. You probably don't even notice half the stuff that goes on or how your family works anymore, where if an outsider came in, they'd be like, oh, you don't like to discipline your kids or whatever, whatever it is. I know I'm fucking old. A lot of you probably don't have kids, but whatever, you get my point. So with UFC, again, a lot of these cappers are great, but what I like to do is I like to listen to them, and I do absolutely do some of my own research as well. I'm just saying it's not as much as some of these other guys who do a ton. But sometimes you can hear things and what they're saying, and they definitely, just like I do with NBA or MLB, they have their process that they get into, and it kind of rolls along the same lines. I'm not saying their outcomes do, but the things they talk about roll along the same lines. And so if you listen to them and if you start to know how to listen to them well too. And so what I hope to be able to do is two things. Number one, to run through these fights a little bit more quickly, give you an overview of what I've been hearing on all the different ones, and a little bit of maybe what I've looked up as well here and there. But number two, to just kind of say, like, what's the feel on this fight, given what the experts are saying? What is the stuff that maybe they're not noticing as clearly in how they talk about the fight that seems to come through to me anyway when I listen to them talk about it? So just want to say that up front. That's how I'm approaching it. Going to try to bring some fun to this too. I don't have it for every fight, but for some of these fights, I'm going to talk about the most overdone take of the week too. There's some stuff that's kind of funny or just repeated a lot when you start listening to a lot of UFC content. So anyway, that's the plan. We'll roll through these fights overall relatively quickly. Hopefully give you a sense though of where people are landing on these who know their shit when it comes to UFC. So this is for UFC 274, calling it UFC Roundup, because I am not breaking it down the way I would with NBA or MLB. But yeah, trying to give you a feel for all the different fights. You get it, right? Let's get to the fights. All right, so first up, we got Nunes going up against Fernie Garcia. On this one, what I'm hearing is a lot of people just not sure if Fernie Garcia is UFC caliber or not. Now, what does UFC caliber mean? I guess it just means guys who can come into the division and have some staying power, or come to the UFC and have some staying power. They're not going to come in, fight their 2 or 3 fights, and then get cut right away. That's where people seem to be at with Garcia. There are some people who are a little bit higher on him and feel like some of his boxing and his output could give him a chance to have some pretty competitive and exciting fights. But at the same time, he's gone to a lot of split decisions and stuff, even outside of the UFC. So there is some evidence there to say maybe he's not going to make the best run of it here. Journey on the other side, another guy who's probably disappointed in the UFC based on what I hear people's expectations for him being. However, there is still a sense that he does have the skills to be competitive in the UFC and that he probably has Garcia covered in most aspects in this fight, except that his output can be low at times. And that's the danger, is if this fight goes to decision and Garcia has a higher output and Nunes has a lower output, then maybe you find yourself in trouble. Didn't really have any overdone takes for this one, but in terms of majority opinion, people are on Nunes here, especially because he's an underdog. Most people I've heard are either passing or taking Nunes. In the words of the immortal Paul Shaughnessy and CJ Safdie, most people that I've heard are saying this is dog or pass. Also, most people believe that this fight will go the distance. For me personally, I don't have anything outside of that. I actually did take a small amount so far on Nunes. I'm considering adding more. I probably will use some over 1.5 or even over 2.5 in the latter parlays that I put out as well. So that's this fight. Most people leaning toward the dog on that one. Next fight up, we got Ariana Carnelossi versus Lupita Godinez. I'm going to start off with the overdone take on this one. Can't tell you, there's so many people have said something like, I like to call Carnelossi Andrade light or lesser Andrade. And it's like, yeah, you and most of the other people I listen to, that is like the comparison that is used most often. Not that she has the skill set of Jessica Andrade, who's just a beast, but that she fights in maybe a little bit of a similar way with less skill. So that is the take you'll hear across the board pretty much this week. In terms of what I hear on this fight, most people think Godinez can hang on the feet here. That might be the place that Carnelossi could especially potentially have an advantage in terms of some of the power, though people think Godinez is more technical and probably a better striker overall. And then definitely people are looking at Godinez to get takedowns and have some control in the ground and even potentially get a submission, especially later on. The challenge is that Carnelossi really goes to war, kind of like Andrade does, and so it's not going to be easy for Godinez, and Godinez is still a little bit young. So when I listen to this, what I hear is people overall, when they talk about the fight, it feels like they're pretty confident, and then when they go to their take on the fight, they feel hesitant, which is an interesting thing to me, and I think it could potentially have something to do with the line here, which is probably a little bit too wide for people given Carnelossi's power and fighting style, and maybe Godinez's age as well, like that they think maybe she needs a little bit more experience. But when I just listen to people talk, Godinez feels like a solid spot on this card to me. Obviously it's MMA. People always say this, anybody can win any fight like that. Yeah, that's the whole point of capping and figuring out, lines and what you think it should be. So I do, the majority opinion definitely here is Godinez, but a lot of people passing. And there are a couple people who have been on Carnelossi. To me, Godinez seems like a relatively decent parlay piece. I also think that there's a decent chance of this fight going to the distance, not like, I don't feel awesome about it. But it is women's MMA and Carnelossi's durable. So maybe a little bit of a chance of that as well. So again, on this one, most people lean into the Godinez side, but maybe not with as much conviction as you would expect them to, or confidence. Next up, we got Cledson Rodriguez versus CJ Vergara. This one, what I'm hearing, people believe that Rodriguez really could be a legitimate prospect. This is his first fight in the UFC. So most people, though, I feel like do want to see more from him. I do hear definitely some hesitancy about whether what they've seen outside of the UFC is going to hold up at a UFC level, or to what extent it will. There have been a couple people out there who are really excited about Rodriguez as a prospect and think that he's going to borderline be something special, but that is definitely not the majority position that I've heard. On the Vergara side, people talk about CJ Vergara like they do a Honda Accord. It's a decent car, not likely to break down, but it's not going to wow anyone. So basically what that translates to is he's probably likely to be able to hang in there, take a decent amount of damage, just keep plodding forward. A lot of people, not a lot, I would say like almost half of people are looking at Rodriguez by decision because they believe in Vergara's durability, but not in his ability to actually win minutes or actually win the fight. So overall, definitely pretty strong sentiment leading toward Rodriguez here, even with as wide as the line is. I have heard few, if any, people actually wanting to take a dog shot on Vergara. The one thing that you could consider is if Rodriguez looks like he's gassing after a couple rounds, maybe you consider, because Vergara by that time is probably going to be pretty massive plus money, so you could consider a small shot at that point. Most people here also leaning toward the over 2.5, even though, like I said, there are some who believe Rodriguez will be able to finish quickly. But because of Vergara's durability, a lot of people looking to the over 2.5 or fight goes to decision on this one as well. Next fight up is Tracy Cortez versus Melissa Gatto. When it comes to overdone takes on this one, I got two. Number one, Tracy Cortez struggles to make weight, not wake mate, make weight. So there's that. We can watch the scales. I'm not saying these takes aren't right. Just saying this is something you're going to hear on most of the things you listen to. The other one is some cappers like to turn into TMZ reporters and talk about Cortez's relationship with Brian T. City Ortega. Couple even going so far as to wonder about how there will be improvements in her jiu-jitsu game because of her connection to Ortega. That seems like a really bad version of MMA math to me that isn't likely to work out too well. Sure, I'm sure she's getting some good training in that regard, but a different fighter. I don't think it just like rubs off because they're together. Anyway, those are the overdone takes. What about what I'm hearing on this fight in general? This is an interesting one. A lot of cappers here like Gatto, and the reason that a lot of them like Gatto is it seems like she's more dangerous in this fight. I think it's Gatto, not Gatto. I can't handle that spelling. Holy crap. Give me a second here. There we go. Fixed it. All right. Now it's the right person. So Cortez is likely to get takedowns and want to spend time in top control. Again, this is what I'm hearing from everyone. And just, I mean, look at her fights and you'll see it. But Gatto can definitely threaten submissions from the bottom. Gatto probably a more dynamic striker on the feet. And so this one to me feels a little bit like the Warriors versus the Grizzlies. With the Warriors, they're proven. You know what you're going to get. You know what they want to do. The Grizzlies are exciting, partly because you feel like they can pull off some crazy shit and you're not quite sure. Like John Morant's going to go up, do a backflip, get punched in the face, and then dunk on somebody's head. You know, like you just don't know what's coming and you know that it could be exciting. And so there's this draw to want to bet on the more dynamic, exciting fighter, partly because they're just kind of always live. Like that's where the difference is between NBA and MMA. In MMA, like it just does take 1 second to grab an armbar. It does just take one really solid strike to be able to put somebody down. Even at this weight class, it's possible, right? So I think that feels to me like why people are so excited about Gatto. I mean, I think they think she is a legitimate prospect, and that she can do well, continue to do well in the UFC. But it does feel at this point like people are overlooking Cortez a little bit to me. This is getting to what I think about it. In terms of just other stuff I hear, again, Cortez is going to go for and likely get takedowns. She's more likely to control the bulk of the fight. Yeah, and so that basically covers it. The majority opinion is a dog. Trying to stick with my format here. Sorry, guys, I got off on that. But majority opinion is to take a dog shot on Gatto. However, this line is coming in a lot. And so my guess is that some of these cappers who took the dog shot on Gatto before at plus 150 or more maybe wouldn't take that shot where it currently sits now. Also, people mostly on the over 2.5 here, although some people do believe that Gatto could get a finish inside the distance or under 2.5 even. So my take is I think Cortez has the clearest path to victory, which is to get her down, get top control, and just stay out of trouble with the submissions. But Gatto probably has more paths to victory because she could snatch up something on the ground and also potentially is more dynamic on the feet. And depending how big those shots are and how much time this fight spends on the feet, she could even win some minutes and potentially win some rounds. But I also do think there's some bias here. Gatto's had some exciting fights, been doing well. Cortez, on the other hand, was really flat in her last fight. The weight misses, like I said earlier in the overdone takes. Cortez, I think we're approaching buy low spot on her. Minus 145. I haven't taken it, but I'm watching this line because to me, it feels like we're swinging too far the other way potentially now. And I think Cortez by decision even could potentially be a good spot by the time we get closer to Saturday evening. So that's when I'll be watching. But again, the majority of people out there that I'm hearing are on the dog shot on Melissa Gatto. Next up, Andre Fiallo versus Cameron Van Camp. This one, pretty cut and dry. Oh, where did my... Sorry, these are out of order. There we go. This one's pretty cut and dry. The overdone take on this one is Fiallo went and had a meeting with Dana White and asked to be able to fight a lot. You hear this on every show you listen to. I do think it's a little bit interesting because you have a guy who really believes in himself right now and believes that he's better when he stays active. Good for him, but it's just funny. The meeting with Dana White. If you want to play a drinking game also during the UFC broadcast, this would be one to add to your card. How many times do they mention Fiallo's meeting with Dana White to ask to fight a lot? In terms of what I hear on this one, Fiallo's likely to go out and starch him. I mean, Fiallo wasn't great before coming to the UFC, but he's been fighting incredibly well. He's got a lot of power. He's dynamic. And people talk about Cameron Van Camp like one of the extras in The Last Kingdom. I don't know if any of you watch The Last Kingdom. If you do not, what the hell are you doing? That is, it's a phenomenal show, in my opinion. There's other shows like it, Vikings and shit like that, but The Last Kingdom is the best one. Now I think you need a VPN to watch it on Netflix. For some reason, at least in my area, they weren't showing it. Totally off. Hey, if anyone wants to do a stream on The Last Kingdom sometime, let's do it. That'd be sweet. Anyway, way off track. Here's what I mean is the extras in The Last Kingdom. These are guys who are, they're Vikings or they're Englishmen or whatever, who train their whole lives for a battle. They're part of the army. And then they go out and in the battle scene, they just get cut down in like 10 seconds by one of the main characters because they're not the point. So if you would think about their real lives, it's pretty sad to spend your whole life training for something and then you just get cut down. But you're just not the star and you're not as dynamic. And that's the way people talk about Van Camp here. He's a guy who can make it on the regional scene, be competitive in that way. But when he comes up to this level, he's unlikely to be able to do much of anything. Again, there was like one detractor that I listened to who believes that Van Camp can have enough of an advantage on the ground to potentially do something to Fiallo. Both these guys coming in on short notice. It feels like, this is one where the line is so wide. So I get that that's what makes it hard. But the majority opinion here is definitely Fiallo KO. Even the under 2.5 or fight doesn't go to the distance in terms of parlays is something people like. For me, the line does feel wide, but I can't go on the other side here. I think Fiallo's on a run, and I think it just keeps going here. Even interested a little bit in KO1. I'll see what the line is on that. Next up, we got Blagoy Ivanov versus Marcos Rogerio de Lima. This is another one where the takes are pretty cut and dry across the board. Not a lot of dissenting opinions. The overdone take here is that Ivanov has never been finished, which is an important point to make, though he has been wobbled at times. But yeah, he hasn't been finished. That's a big deal. It's just that's one of the first things you're going to hear on any UFC breakdown you tune into on this fight. When you look at Ivanov, he's like a tank, but he's like a tank that sits, back behind a battle and fires off a round every now and then. So he's not likely to be destroyed, but he also doesn't do a whole lot. He's a guy who just has low output. This is what people talk about. And so the biggest concern with Ivanov, well, there's basically two concerns I hear from people. One, his output is so low that somehow they get to decision and he loses the decision. The bigger one is probably that he's old enough and has enough miles on him now that Lima can crack him and put him out, because Lima has some dynamic striking for the first 3 minutes. After that, he's fucked because he's totally wasted, totally gassed. The majority opinion here, definitely on Ivanov. I heard a couple people taking a dog shot in Lima, but most of them are counting on Ivanov being put out for the first time in his career. So my take after listening to everyone is that this is a pretty good price on Ivanov. It's probably a pretty good piece. It's probably going to be relatively high on the ladder parlays I put together. And also that a shot on submission could be worth it here. It was interesting hearing people talk about how Lima has been submitted in recent fights where that's happened. Probably the best description of this I heard was from CJ Safdie on when he and Lock of the Night were doing the Propping You Up show. Great show, both great cappers. And Cody was just talking about the way that Lima has been subbed lately, where it's just basically that he gives up. And so, Ivanov is the side for most people, and that shot on sub potentially could be worth it. This is also one where you might want to think about, based on all the stuff I just said, a live bet after round one. If Lima goes off in round one and wins that round, you might get a pretty good price on Ivanov. And from all previous indications, Lima's likely to gas after the first round. All right, next up we have Brandon Royval and Matt Schnell. The overdone take on this is just people saying raw dog. I think people just really like to say raw dog, and Brandon Royval gives them that opportunity. So that would be another one to add to your drinking game card for UFC 274, is how many times raw dog gets said. In terms of what people are saying on this fight, or what I hear, first is you don't want to miss this one. This is going to be a high action fight. It's going to be, I think most people think it'll be at least fairly competitive, at least for a while. And so this is one of probably 4 or 5 fights that people would list as their top ones not to miss on this card. In terms of how people talk about Royval and Schnell here, this one feels to me like The Bachelor, where it's down to the last 2 girls, and the guy goes on about how great one woman is and how much time he's enjoyed with her and how she's just really great at conversation and reminds him of his mom and how caring she is and all this shit. And then he doesn't give her a rose. Many breakdowns I've heard this week talk a lot about their respect for Matt Schnell's skill set. And then in the end, pretty much everyone takes Brandon Royval. So again, of course, there are outliers. You listen to enough people break down these fights, somebody's going to be on either side. But I would say large majority on Royval here, and large majority on under 2.5. I do think, for me personally, that under 2.5, even near -150 now, makes sense to me. Royval, Schnell has a fair number of finishes. Royval has 3 decisions in his last 10, but the way they fight, seems likely to lead to a finish at some point. So on this one, people leaning heavily toward Royval and heavily toward the under. Next up, we have Macy Chiasson and Norma Dumont. The overdone take on this one, or thing to add to your, might switch it to add to your UFC drinking game card, is people calling Norma Norm. I'm not quite sure what's up with dropping the A. It's too many letters for people to work in on their breakdowns, I guess. So a lot of people going with Norm. On this fight, basically people hate this fight. I don't think I've heard anyone excited for it. Basically, this is a division that the only thing here is for Amanda Nunes to come back up and fight at 145. There's just nobody else in this division. It's basically these 2 women. People do feel like Dumont has improved. They still don't think she's a great fighter, but that she has become like a solid UFC fighter. Chiasson had promise, but there's no real reason to believe it anymore. Most people view her as a pretty busted prospect. The only real case that I heard out there for taking Chiasson is that neither of these fighters are great and you get a lot of plus money. So even that take was not like someone believed in Chiesa. It was more just like, given the circumstances, maybe you take a dog shot. So majority opinion in this one is definitely Dumont. Its fight goes to decision. I don't really have any take here aside from that. Next, we have Francisco Masaranduba Trinaldo versus Danny Hot Chocolate Roberts. This one, the overdone take, Trinaldo is old, which is very true. He's 40. I think he's 44, which is really crazy for the UFC, but definitely got to get that in there. He's an old guy. So after listening to people talk about this fight, when I envision a Trinaldo win, it just looks like a grimy, messy, clinchy, a few strikes here and there. Probably even Roberts getting the better of those exchanges when they happen, where Trinaldo tries to limit damage until with 10 seconds left in the third round, Trinaldo just clocks him and puts him out. People don't trust Roberts. They don't believe he fights smart. People are, I mean, even there's a lot of cappers who, if somebody's 44, it's just an automatic fade. But it feels like even those guys this week are kind of like, how long can this dude fight and still look relatively good? So I feel like, yeah, the majority opinion here is actually probably Roberts, but I wouldn't say that it is like a massive majority. It's a little bit of a majority. A lot of people feel like they don't know what to do with this fight. Fair number on the over 2.5. I think for me, I'd have to go along with Paul Shaughnessy and just say, I don't know if I can bet against Trinaldo until he's actually done. So I probably won't have much of anything on this one. This is one of those fights where there weren't super strong takes. Next one, a little bit stronger, Randy Brown versus Chaos Williams. And man, I should have put these in the right order so that I wouldn't have to search for my notes here every time. All right, on this one, not really overdone takes here. In terms of what I hear, another kind of best fight on the card, probably top 5 fights on the card, so you don't want to miss this one either. It should be a really good fight. When I listen to people talk, it feels to me like Brown should be the favorite. Most people I listen to have a lot of good things to say about Randy Brown. They are very high on the improvements he's made. They're high on his size. They're high on the way he's able to manage range and distance. They're high on his offense. They're high on his intelligence, his fight IQ. They're high on his experience. So just like the total package, people are generally very high on Randy Brown. And when I hear people talk about Chaos Williams, it's generally positive still. Don't get me wrong. People aren't down on Chaos Williams, but there is a lot of focus, of course, on his power, which absolutely is there, but he does go to decision sometimes as well. And there are some people questioning how he's going to continue to perform as he gets these higher levels of competition and whether he's going to be able to close distance and get off the shots that he needs to be able to win. So after listening to people talk about this, if I played guess the line and said, you've listened to people talk about these fights, what do you think Randy Brown is? What's this fight lined at? I would have said Randy Brown minus 140. Well, Randy Brown right now is still at plus 102. Now, the line was better earlier in the week. I actually don't know how high it was, but I know that it was better than where it is now. It feels to me like people are mostly afraid to jump on Brown because of Chaos's power. So the majority opinion here is Brown, but there's a lot of people hesitant to pull the trigger on him. So my take on this after listening to people, and again, this is where I think hopefully if you're just joining, like I said at the beginning, part of what I'm trying to do here is have an outside set of eyes and ears on what people are saying. Well, I guess mostly ears on what they're saying. You don't, whatever. And be able to kind of cut through all the stuff that's out there and maybe bring some takes that people are saying but don't want to actually jump on. And I think this is one of those. I think almost everyone I listen to, the way they talk, Randy Brown should be the favorite, and it feels like people are afraid of Chaos's power. But Chaos has gone to decision in 3 of his last 6 fights. And in a fight where I hear there's a significant skill advantage for one guy, and that guy is good at range management and good at kind of staying out of the way of power shots for the most part, and that guy's a dog, that absolutely feels like it's worth a shot to me. Absolutely, Chaos could put him out here because he can put anybody out. But if Randy Brown was minus 140, it would be probably a different conversation, but he's just not. So from what I hear from other people, and some of the stats and things I've looked at, especially in terms of more recent fights, feels like a good spot to me for Randy Brown here. Next up, we've got the kickoff of the main card, which is Donald Cowboy Cerrone and Joe Lauzon. This one, the overdone take is that these guys are past their prime. And again, I guess you have to say it because they are, right? But it's just the thing everyone starts off with. What I hear on this fight, it's basically two things. I mean, well, other than them being old and past their prime. One is that Lauzon tends to go out hard. So he's gonna and I'll be honest, I'm a little bit more I've really just been watching MMA a lot for the last 2.5 years. And so I haven't seen a lot of Joe Lauzon's fights. But people talk about him coming out hard. I did see his fight against Pierce, which absolutely was impressive. And then people talk about how Cowboy starts slow and tends to come on later. And so most people view this fight as one of those Lauzon early or Cerrone late kind of things. The majority opinion here, I would say, is on Cerrone, but this is a fight that people are not running to bet on. People do not feel confident in this one. I think they don't really know how much either of these guys have left at this point. And so there is a ton of hesitancy to bet on this fight. One of the interesting things is that I've heard a lot of people on the under 2.5 here, which I have to assume is number one, that Lauzon comes out fast and Cerrone has been finished some. So obviously there's an opportunity for finish there. But the other must be that they think Lauzon will gas. Cerrone can get finishes for sure. But I would have thought that there would be a decent chance of this going to decision. But the majority of people are on the under 2.5 in this one. In terms of my take, I think one of the things that I'll look for after listening to everybody is to bet Cerrone live after one round if he's still in there. And it looks like he's got, he's able to give something moving forward. Lauzon is a dog right now, pretty significant dog. And so maybe we get something closer to even money if Lauzon comes out and takes the first round, and then, we can get something live going into the second. Next up, we have Mauricio Shogun Rua against OSP in the second legacy fight on this card. The overdone take here is Shogun Rua was my favorite fighter growing up. A lot of these cappers have been watching UFC for martial arts and MMA in a long time, for a long time in general. Shout out to them. That's awesome. That's why they're good at what they do. But apparently he was a lot of people's favorite fighter when they were young. So I do feel like there's some sentimentality baked into the breakdowns of this fight. And maybe that's unfair. And certainly people could counter me and say it's not true. But when I listen to people break down this fight, the best breakdowns that I've heard talk about the reasons to think that Shogun is shot at this point. In particular, that he tapped to strikes from Paul Craig. And I know that's one fight. It's one time. But it feels like as people go through the breakdown, the only real reason I hear people giving for betting him is that OSP isn't very good anymore either. Might be kind of shot. And Shogun is a big underdog. And that, I guess, is a little bit... I wrote down here, like, the takes are one of two. One is OSP is much better at this point in his career, more athletic, more power, more ways to win. And Shogun tapped to strikes from Paul Craig. The second one, they're both washed. Why wouldn't you take a shot on the dog at plus 205? So those are basically the two takes that I hear. In terms of the majority opinion, I actually think it leans toward Shogun Rua here in terms of who people are taking. But like I said, it feels to me like there's a decent amount of sentimentality being baked into that take. In terms of actual fight breakdown that I've heard, I feel like I hear more people talking about legitimate reasons why OSP should win this fight. And so in terms of my take, I don't have strong takes here. I think I will end up leaning toward OSP. But this fight could be one that after a round is two old guys staring at each other, which would not be very fun. So, nothing too exciting on this fight. But personally, I feel like the more technical breakdowns would lean toward OSP. 3 fights left. Next up, we got Michael Chandler versus Tony Ferguson in what will hopefully be a fun fight here. Two of the primary overdone takes here. One is that Ferguson has lost 11 rounds in a row, which fair enough. Again, I'm not saying these aren't things that need to be pointed out, but just they're things that are being pointed out a lot. And also that Ferguson's a little out there, which kind of makes things fun, right? In terms of what I hear on this fight, I would put it this way. Imagine Ja Morant playing Pat Bev in one-on-one, but in 10 years. Now, don't get me wrong. I am not saying in terms of overall career that Tony Ferguson is Patrick Beverley. That is absolutely not my point, and so don't go there. What I am saying is 10 years from now, Pat Bev is still going to be a dog. Pat Bev would be out there just fucking with Morant at every possible turn to try to piss him off, to try to get a little edge. He knows all the vet tricks, all this kind of stuff. And so he might be able to make it a little bit of a game for a little while. But in 10 years, Pat Bev is going to be over the hill in terms of the athleticism, in terms of the skills. I mean, you don't lose all your skills, but it's hard to get a shot off if you got somebody younger on you who can get up and swat it. Morant in 10 years, yeah, he's going to be older for sure, but he's probably not totally shot to pieces at that point. After listening to people talk about this fight, that's kind of the way that I see this one. Chandler is more athletic, probably less damage, definitely more explosive. At this point in their careers, probably as good or better skills on most levels. I'm not talking about forever, but just right now. Now, there have been 2 takes that I hear on this fight as well, though. One is Chandler's way too much, way too skilled at this point. That's kind of what I've talked about, and it's probably the more prominent one. But take 2 is Chandler will blow his wad in round 1 because that's what he does. So the dog shot on Ferguson is worth it because this line is incredibly wide. Let's see what it's up to now. Most recently, we got Ferguson at plus 300. Some people even saying, like I said on the last fight, wait till after round 1, let Chandler blow his wad, let this line balloon to plus 350, plus 400, and then take the shot on Ferguson, who's going to hang in there. We know that Ferguson doesn't go away. We know that even at this stage in his career, he's not easy to put away. So there definitely is a strong sentiment of people thinking that the dog shot on Ferguson is worth it, not because they think Ferguson's likely to win, but because the line is so wide. So my take here, I'm going to go to one particular capper and just talk about a take that I think deserves some consideration. And that's Dan Tom. If you don't listen to his podcast, Protect Your Neck, and you want in-depth breakdown, another phenomenal one that I would recommend. He's got incredible insight. Regularly, I would say, sees things that I don't hear other people talking about. And so 100% credit to him on this. But he talked about how, I think he said 1 in every 8 fights or something, but how once in a while, Chandler will back off a little bit and fight smarter and fight a little bit slower and implement a better game plan. I think after coming in and losing some close fights here, really high-level fights, obviously, for Chandler, with Gaethje, with Oliveira, I think that this is a spot where he probably knows he needs to win. And I think maybe he does come in here and fight a little bit smarter than he has in the past. Now, that doesn't mean he couldn't get a round 1 finish, but what I think it means is he conserves his gas tank a little better and doesn't just blow it all in the first round. So personally, I lean toward that side of thinking that Ferguson is at least shot enough to lose to a high-level guy like Chandler here. The line is incredibly wide, and so I would probably mostly only use it as a parlay piece, and I'm not even sure I'd use it as a top-level parlay piece. And we'll see if Ferguson can prove me and a lot of other people wrong in terms of what he's got left. Next up, we got the first of the 2 title fights, Rose Namajunas versus Carla Esparza. Think this should be an interesting one. Overdone take on this one. If you didn't know, this is a rematch, though I think it was 8 years ago now that these 2 fought. So, I mean, maybe their games are similar, but they're definitely they've evolved as fighters. In terms of what I hear on this fight, there's two primary well, maybe three. So the first one is people absolutely acknowledge the incredible talent that Rose Namajunas has. Incredibly talented as a striker. Yeah, nobody is hedging or saying that Rose is not a phenomenal fighter. However, the two things that I hear more often, one is people talking a lot about how Rose got taken down a lot by Zhang Weili, and that Esparza is a better wrestler than Zhang is. And so people believing that Esparza will be able to get takedowns the same way that Weili did, but that when she gets Rose down, she'll have a better time holding her down and even working and doing some damage, and not letting Rose get up quite so quickly. I also hear people talk about how Esparza does not give up on the takedowns. And so even if Rose gets up one time, two times, three times, Esparza's not going to stop taking her down. And over time, that gets really tiring. And so a lot of people, and I'll get to, sort of the majority opinion here, but a lot of people talking about how that's going to be able to wear on Rose and lean toward Carla. The other thing is that a lot of people still don't fully trust Rose to be there mentally. If you go back and look, you know that Rose has been kind of all over the place mentally. It does feel like she's come into, to me, like just watching her recently, it feels like she's really come into some confidence now. It feels less fragile, but there's a lot of people out there who don't trust it still, and aren't confident that Rose won't break if the fight is really tough. So majority opinion here is actually Rose should be the favorite, but Esparza is worth the shot at this price. Some people believe that the line's going to keep, and actually the line's up to 185 now on Esparza. So people have been right. This line continues to grow. Personally, I did take a small amount on the dog here, and I took it at 176. So man, if you can get it at 185 now, maybe even wait if you're interested in that, see if it continues to grow. It does feel like a lot rests on Esparza getting control time here. To me, I mean, Rose should be able to control the fight on the feet. So if Esparza can't hold her down, that's going to be trouble. But if she can, it feels like, again, especially at this price, it makes sense to me what people are saying, that at this price, it's worth it. Also, in terms of just my take on things, there's been a lot of talk lately about taking wrestlers and grapplers over strikers lately in the UFC, and that you have seen that when those wrestlers, grapplers are able to chain together takedowns and take people down over and over or hold them down, they do tend to get the victory. And I feel like to some extent that's what we've got here. Also, plus money on the under 4.5 isn't crazy to me. I think if it's on the feet, Rose absolutely can get a finish. And then if Carla holds her down long enough, tires her out, I mean, maybe there get to be opportunities for a submission there. Maybe ground and pound, but so under 4.5, it's a lot of time to work. At plus money, I don't think that's a terrible look either. All right, man, this fight's going to be fun. Charles do Bronx Oliveira, Justin Gaethje. What can you say? This is a fight that you don't want to miss. That's actually probably one of the overdone takes right there, is that this is going to be an awesome fight. Other overdone take on this one, Justin Gaethje has good leg kicks. In case you didn't know, now you know. Really on this one, I would say if you really want to go in depth, go listen to some of the great breakdowns out there. I'm not going to go into that kind of depth. Basically, high level, big picture, what I hear most people saying this comes down to is, can Gaethje finish him in the first 2 rounds? That after that, Oliveira is likely to take over, but that Oliveira has a chance on the feet. He's not entirely outgunned. That if Oliveira gets a takedown or gets to Gaethje's back, it is very likely to be a wrap. That Gaethje has relatively good takedown defense, especially early on in the fight. So that maybe isn't incredibly likely to happen really early on. And just that this is going to be a firefight. In terms of majority opinion, this one is split. I would say the majority opinion is that this fight could go either way. And if this fight could go either way, you could say, well, why not take the dog shot on Gaethje then? Plus 155. Honestly, I don't hate it. It's actually where I'm leaning right now. I do think I agree with the idea that Oliveira has more ways to get the victory here. that he's not totally outclassed on the feet, and he certainly has the grappling advantage. But if it's anywhere close to a toss, I mean, yeah, if it's anywhere close to a toss-up, plus 155 is not a bad number. So that's something I'm considering. Also, majority opinion, definitely on the under 2.5 here, which makes sense to me as well. These guys are going to come out hard, probably Gagey in particular. And so it definitely would not be shocking to see this one end under 2.5. I actually see now that there's an under 1.5 at plus 140 now. I don't think I'd want to go to under 1.5. I'm more likely to use even an alternate under 3.5 or something like that in one of the latter parlays. But I will get those together and they will be out by tomorrow morning. So that's the roundup for this pay-per-view UFC 274. Would love to hear any comments, hear what you're thinking. What are your best bets? Share those, and we'll look forward to watching this on Saturday. Have a good one, everybody.